Guys, we did it. We finally hit our goal. Thank you guys so much. If you didn't see, we did get to 1,000 YouTube subscribers last week. So thank you guys. That has been our goal since literally day one of starting this channel, and it was pretty cool to get that notification. So been smiling all week, and hopefully we can continue smiling after the checkered flag flies tonight at Daytona. We got the regular season finale. There's a lot of hype around this race, just in terms of you got to win to make it in, kind of the Harrison Burton Hail Mary type of situation and race that a lot of teams, drivers, even fans are probably hoping for. So after today, we will know who the drivers are going to be who are going to be chasing that championship in 2025. But in terms of tonight, let's just talk about DFS purposes. So we're at Daytona. It is a super speedway race, and the overall thought process and strategy at these types are stack the back. And what does that mean? It really just means you want most of your drivers, probably starting in the 20s and in the 30s to make up your lineups. Salary doesn't matter. Equipment for the most part, it doesn't matter. It really just comes down to, who gives you the most place differential upside and, somewhat of an ownership game as well, because, there could be a really chalky driver that starts 30th, but maybe the guy who starts 29th isn't as a brand, name driver, or maybe they aren't as in good equipment, but they start right next to that guy. And, if the guy in 30th is going to have 45% ownership and the guy in 29th is only going to have 30% ownership, like that's a 15% leverage play, right there for basically the same amount of upside. So those are little things you kind of want to think about. We'll go through it here in a driver by driver breakdown. But again, just wanted to say, we did it. We hit 1,000, YouTube subs. So really appreciate, all the support and love you've have given us, over the years. So thank you. So, in terms of the driver by driver breakdown here, let me pull this over so you guys can see a little bit better. Um, when you get to the super speedway races, the main thing you want to look at is probably tab E, the grid. And you'll see as we go further back in the grid, the interest level goes up. So, um, you got Logano, Byron, Blaney, and Hamlin up there. I'm really just not getting to any of these guys. Yes, Logano and Blaney will likely run well. They will likely lead a lot of laps. They'll likely be up front for most of the race. But even if it's on the white flag lap and they get wrecked and finish 25th or 24th or something, like that's really going to hurt your line, with these starting spots. So yes, they're likely the favorites to win. Um, they should run well. Their stats here, like they have the most amount of laps led. A lot of numbers are saying, hey, you want to play these guys, but for DFS purposes, they carry way too much risk. Versus like Chase Elliott, for example, starts 30th. Even if Elliott wrecks out, like you still have a good chance of cashing. Now, Elliott's ownership is going to be significantly higher than all these guys priced above him, but for good reason. He starts really deep in the field and he gives you a lot of place differential upside. So, not getting the Logano, Byron, Blaney, and Hamlin, maybe if you're doing a 150 max, or a 20 max, you want to sprinkle in some ownership just to get risky and different, some GPP dart plays, but otherwise, typically you want to focus more on the Elliott types of plays tonight. Keselowski starts 10th, kind of a tough range where, again, typically we don't really want to play these guys in the top 10. Limited PD upside gives you a little bit more, than some of the guys that we just talked about in the upper price range, but still, if I'm hand building, I'm not clicking on Keselowski's name. Same with Larson and Cindric. Like Larson starts too far forward for me. Cindric will run really well, likely works really well with his Penske teammates. Likely he's going to be out front, likely he's leading laps, but again, these races you have to imagine and predict and project that there's going to be wrecks, there's going to be cautions, and if there are, and he's involved in it, your lineup is done at that point. And we know these Penske cars, even starting this high, will have ownership. And there's a chance that, say Austin Cindric goes out and wins the race, it's not really like you're going to rack up dominator points with fast laps because those are distributed throughout the field. And yeah, you might get a driver who leads. some laps and gets you some points that way. But if Cindric wins the race, but like the Stenhouses, the Bushers, the Reddicks, the Priestes, they all finish well, like there's a really good chance that Cindric doesn't even hit the optimal lineup as these PD plays come through. So, even if he has a great day and wins the race, it still might not be enough. Um, so when you get to Christopher Bell and Kyle Busch, these are the types of plays where the interest level starts to change a little bit. They start outside of the top 10. They still start in the first half of the field. So, again, if I'm hand building, I'm likely not targeting these plays. But if you're trying to get different, you don't mind some risk. You just want some leverage plays for tournaments. Some guys are going to be lower owned, but still give you a little bit of upside. Christopher Bell and Kyle Busch make a lot of sense. Um, Stenhouse, Busher, Reddick. I like all these guys. We didn't get too many chalky plays like Elliott, and the quote unquote good drivers and good teams starting really far back in the 30s. So I think by default, a lot of people are going to navigate to these three drivers right here. And I am too. So I'm going to have a lot of ownership on Stenhouse, Busher, and Reddick. They all start, in the second half of the field. They all give us some good place differential upside, but they're going to carry ownership. So, maybe you pivot and be like, hey, instead of playing Stenhouse, I'm going to play Ross Chastain, who starts 19th. Yeah, he starts 6 spots, further forward, but, his ownership's likely to come in way less than Stenhouse. So those are the types of, one off or even two off types of pivot plays I think you can build and still get some of these chalky plays in your lineup, but find a couple of different ways to get different. Or if Stenhouse is going to be 30% owned, maybe only play 20% of Stenhouse and try to come, under the field on these chalky plays. That's at least how I build for tournaments, for cash games, maybe just lock in the chalk plays and hope for the best. Bubba Wallace and Ross Chastain are similar. They're kind of more of the pivot options off of the Reddick, Bushers, and Stenhouses. Still give you some good place differential upside, but not as much. Suarez is kind of in that tough, like no man's land. He's right outside of the top 10, so really not that much interest. I'd rather play Bell and Bush, over Suarez if you want to get aggressive, but Suarez is kind of right in that same boat, and his ownership will be pretty low. So more of a GPP dart play to kind of get different. Alex Bowman starts second, basically no upside. Even if he wins the race, there's a good chance he gets outscored. Ryan Preece is going to be another really popular option um, with Chase Elliott. They start right next to each other. They're both, in good cars, good equipment. They start deep. A lot of, cash games will probably start with those two drivers. Chase Briscoe probably going to be pretty low owned. Another like GPP dart play just to get aggressive and risk it, per se. But otherwise, he's not going to project well. McDowell starts mid pack. He's another kind of interesting pivot play off of those high owned, drivers in the 20s that we kind of talked about. Typically runs pretty well here too. Hocevar usually just drops to the back at these styles of tracks and hopes for a good finish, as the wrecks happen. Now, maybe with this being a playoff, cutoff, the regular season, finale, maybe he tries to win and is a little bit more aggressive than he typically is, but really just focusing on the starting position and starting 16th does give us a little bit of upside, but there's definitely more downside to him as he still starts in the first half of the field. Josh Berry's in the same category as Suarez. The only advantage I would say that Berry has is, he's kind of out of that Penske shop relatively. So, he has a lot of good cars to work with if he can get linked up with them. A lot of drivers who are really good on these styles of tracks. If he can work with them, good finish is probably in the cards for him. But that also means that he'll probably be running up front, and that's typically where we see, especially as the stages come to a close or, the race, gets closer to the end of the checkered flag. That's where people are making passes and making moves, and that's usually where the wrecks happen and start. So if he's up there, he's kind of in the danger zone, but honestly, any point in this track or any, for where you're running is the danger zone at these styles of tracks. Um, Gibbs and Allmendinger, I think, makes sense for tournaments. Again, they start mid-pack. They're in the player pool. Are they target plays? No, but their ownership likely isn't going to be too high, and they'll still give you some good place differential, upside. So I like those guys in tournaments. Austin Dillon starts seventh. It's kind of like Briscoe, not going to have that much ownership, doesn't really project that well. I really don't want to play him unless I'm like sprinkling him into like 150 max lineups. Um, but then we get down to the 6K range, and I like all these guys. Jones, Nemechek, Gregson, Gilliland. Nemechek and Gregson obviously start, the furthest back. They'll probably give you the most amount of place differential upside, but all these drivers here too, like aren't your name recognizable drivers. So, even for cash games, I think a lot of people are going to play the Stenhouses, the Bushers, the Reddicks, the Preces, the Elliots, just because they're, in better equipment. They're, more of a name brand driver, but Jones, Nemechek, Gregson, Gillen, they all start right in that range too. And they have just as much upside as those guys that we just talked about. Um, Zane Smith starts a little bit too far forward, kind of an aggressive GPP play. Justin Haley, going to be really popular. Good car, relatively good car, starts deep in the field. Really can't lose you any points starting 37th. I like Cole Custer a lot. I don't think his ownership's going to be too high. He starts very deep in the field. SVG starts mid-pack. Typically, we don't really like playing SVG outside of the road courses, but anything can happen and his ownership will be pretty low. So more of a tournament play to get different. I do like Austin Hill, starts deep in the field. You don't really want to overthink it, too much. Ty Dillon likely doesn't see that much ownership, but kind of like McDowell and some of the other guy, AJ Allmendinger that we were talking about, starts at mid pack on the second half of the field, gives you a little bit more upside than downside. I like him for tournaments. I like Riley Herbst. Typically doesn't run that well or finish that well, but he really just needs to finish the race. And if he finishes the race, we know there's going to be incidents. We know there's going to be drivers that have issues and wreck out, and he will give you, positive place differential. And then once you get down to these bottom plays, even Riley Herbst, like a lot of people are not going to want to play Cody Ware. They're not going to want to play BJ McLeod. They're not going to feel comfortable clicking on Casey Mears. Playing Joey Gase doesn't feel good. Um, and yes, there is some concern with Casey Mears and Joey Gase with the teams that they run for that they will have mechanical issues. There's a good chance they lead, they lose the pack. There's a good chance they go multiple laps down. Honestly, that doesn't really matter as long as we get wrecks and as long as those wrecks don't come on the white flag. Because if they can just finish the race in a pure attrition play and maybe they're running by themselves and they're, away from all the chaos, all they have to do is make it to the checkered flag and they're going to score you points. And their ownership's going to be pretty low. A lot of people don't want to play these types of plays because they're, quote unquote, ugly plays. They don't project well, but those are typically the types of lines that score well at these style tracks, the quote unquote ugly, lineups of like, I can't believe I have money on this line. And it might look awful the entire slate if you watch it on DraftKings, but as soon as a wreck happens, you'll see that little bubble of where you're scoring and it'll, completely shift. Um, you can make the same argument for Cody Ware and BJ McLeod. So don't be afraid to leave a lot of salary on the table. Don't be afraid to be overweight on these, punt plays per se at the back of the field. But really, I think what you can do is really just focus on the grid, the starting spot, and try to just focus most of your drivers starting in the 20s and 30s. And if you are playing tournaments, maybe trying to find some of those pivot plays off of those chalkier guys just to get a little bit of ownership and leverage on them. So that's going to do it for the Daytona video. Hopefully this has been helpful. Again, thank you guys for allowing us to hit our milestone goal of 1,000 YouTube subscribers. If you guys want access to the spreadsheet, it's over on X. It's at Fast Cars FM. Otherwise, have a great Saturday and enjoy tonight's race.